name is Pete Meagher. Welcome to Man Parts, where we explore the lived experiences of men through the lens of internal family systems. Man Parts is a podcast for those who are curious about men, therapists, lovers, children, coaches, and anyone who wishes to deepen their understanding of men. My guest is Bob Falconer. Bob has spent decades helping people heal from trauma, training IFS practitioners, and writing about the intersection of psychotherapy and spirituality. He has written and co-authored several influential books on trauma, healing, and spiritual dimensions of IFS, including Many Minds, Oneself with Richard Schwartz, The Others Within Us, which I've read a couple of times, and Spirit. Bob has a documentary coming out on psychedelics and addiction recovery and a new book on the way. Through his trainings, his books, and more recently through one of his consultation groups, Bob has expanded my understanding of healing in ways I'm deeply grateful for. Bob, I want to thank you for being a part of Man Parts.
Glad to be here.
Let me start with, before we talk about IFS, trauma, and masculinity or healing, I'd like to start somewhere much simpler. The title of my podcast. The title has been interesting. It has certainly activated my own parts. One part thinks it's playful, Man Parts, and another part worries people will misunderstand it. Spotify even flagged it for review before letting me publish it, which didn't exactly calm my worried parts. When you first heard the title Man Parts, what happened inside you?
I had a little bit of those feelings, and I caught the double entendre parts, as in parts work and all of that, but also man parts as men's privates, men's genitals, and but I don't mind being provocative, so it was okay with me.
Yeah, I figured when I formulated it and it just kind of downloaded to me, I wanted it to capture the essence of the podcast. And it always makes me smile when I say or hear it. So you've spent decades listening to people's inner worlds. The core of the podcast is about men's healing. When you hear the phrase, how men heal, what comes alive in you?
Well, my own background is extreme sadistic sexual and physical abuse. And parents who were addicts, but high-functioning addicts. And we would go to church every Sunday, but I would be raped and beaten throughout the week by my father, his friends, my mother, my older brother. And my mother was institutionalized a few times when I was a kid. And my brother committed suicide when we were teenagers. My father was eventually murdered. So most of my career as a therapist has been working with men with similar backgrounds. Severe trauma, capital T trauma.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the framework I've come from. And I'm old enough so that I was part of the memory wars. There were all these therapists, and most of the therapy schools denied the existence of childhood sexual abuse. And they turned a blind eye, and it was actually a grassroots movement that got that accepted. And even PTSD was fought against vehemently by the academic establishment. It was only admitted to the DSM in 1980, and it was only admitted because the Vietnam veterans rap groups formed a political movement which pressured Washington, D.C., which pressured the academics. So there was tremendous resistance to recognizing childhood trauma, and especially men's trauma. And so this has given me a vast and I think healthy skepticism for the status quo.
Yes. Well, I think that's what I like about you, Bob. Particularly your perspective and thinking outside the box. And I don't know, I feel like you're a healthy rebel, which is always a good thing. What have men taught you about healing, if there is something they've taught you?
Oh, well, there's one very sad thing. A lot of my colleagues in doing this kind of work, we used to say this is a joke, but it is not funny. Women go to therapy, men go to prison. And statistically, there's a lot of truth in that. I think healing from major trauma or any healing is very difficult for anyone, but I think it's even harder for men. Uh, we're more stigmatized. I was part of sort of the survivor movement, but because I was a man, I was targeted by a lot of the women who were ahead. They were the leaders of the sexual abuse survivor movement. So it was a very uncomfortable position to have the people who should have been my allies being very suspicious, if not outright attacking me. So another thing that makes men's healing especially difficult, I think, we don't have powerful, clear images of what it's like to be a strong man. Being a strong, powerful, healthy man.
Let me move next to. I wanna start broad here, and I know many of the folks who will be listening to this know the internal family systems. But if someone has never heard of IFS, what do they need to know before we continue?
Okay, great question. First of all, your mind is not one thing. You are not one person. Some people go, "Oh, this guy's totally crazy now." You're a system of subpersonalities, of parts, and you're actually a system. And those parts often can hijack you. And this is often easier to see in others. You think, why is my wife behaving like a 3-year-old? Because the 3-year-old part of her is taken over. But that happens to us too. So we're made up of parts. We're not one unified thing. When we're functioning well, we're like an orchestra or a sports team that plays much, much better. They get into sync, and it's just this beautiful collaboration and harmony. Healing is not putting us in a blender and turning us into a smoothie. That is not healing at all. Also, and there's a system of parts in IFS, protectors and exiles, but there's also something called self, which is the witness, which is the seat of awareness, and that no matter how badly you've been hurt, no matter what horrible things you might have done in your life, that can never be dirtied. It cannot be damaged. It can't even be dirtied. It's like the sun on a stormy day. The sun is absolutely fine and untouched, even if the storm has blown down your house and there are mudslides and nothing's left in your neighborhood. The sun is undamaged. And that sun is who we really, really are. That's our core. That message has been incredibly powerful for a lot of the men that I've worked with who were just so shamed and beaten and hurt, and then sometimes had done horrible things, themselves later in life.
So, I think you've alluded to this, but men are kind of allergic to therapy. Why might IFS be useful for men, especially in that context?
Okay. A lot of reasons. What I think maybe one of the most important ones is this idea of multiplicity. It makes it much easier to approach our inner mind without this global shaming. People who are sexually abused as children are flooded in shame almost always, and that is a huge block to turning inside and looking at all. Also, I think it is incredibly hard for a man to say something like, "I was raped, I was abused, I was beaten." There's at the other end of the scale, there's some sort of macho thing about, "Oh, that doesn't happen to real men." It happens to real men. And when you're a child, there's no way you could prevent any of that kind of stuff happening to you. So there's the shame.
What is IFS's greatest contribution to men's healing?
Well, that's a tough one because there's a lot. First, I think this realization that we're a system of subpersonalities, we're not one unified thing, that completely revolutionizes psychotherapy when you start exploring the implications of that. And healing is actually like it's turning a civil war into an orchestra or a great jazz band or something. That's a very, very different model of healing, and it changes the whole picture. A lot of things 180 degrees are changed the other way. For example, if somebody comes in to see me and they're raging with anger, the old school would be to say something like, well, take a few deep breaths and put your feet on the floor and ground yourself so that you can be in this little healing window of tolerance. I don't do that in IFS because I think that shames the anger in the men who come to see me. I would say something like, hi, angry part, it's really good to meet you. We want to get to know you better. And that's also true for fear parts, anxious parts, all these things. We don't want to shame those extreme parts. We want to welcome them in. That's just one little example about how IFS is 180 degree change from what therapists used to do. There are many other parts work systems now that are picking up this basic model. And I think it has largely changed the modern therapy environment. And we haven't even gotten into the farther reaches of IFS where there's more that it pushes. Another thing that's two more things, and then I'll be quiet on this one. This idea that self cannot be damaged. No matter what happened to you, it didn't dirty or damage who you really are. That could not be touched, no matter how degrading or humiliating the abuse was. That is still pure in you. Absolutely undamaged. That message was from Dick Schwartz in IFS was the opposite of what most other therapists had told me. They told me, you're damaged goods. You'll never really have a good life. Expect a small, miserable little life. Maybe take some meds and, you're damaged goods. That's a poisonous message. And I think that message reflects the limitations of the therapists, not the limitations of the clients who are coming to them. And I get kind of pissed off when I hear therapists saying stuff like that. A third thing that's really important and a little harder to understand, I think. In IFS, the location of healing is between the client's parts, these subpersonalities, and the client's self, that radiant sun of who they really are inside themselves. That's where the healing happens, not between the client and the therapist. This has a really important corollary for abuse survivors. They don't have to tell the therapist about their abuse. What's important is they, the self, come to witness completely all the memories and horrible stuff the part had. This really, really helps lessen shame and make therapy much less of a seemingly insurmountable barrier.
When you say to men that the self is indestructible, how do they respond to that?
Sometimes they're immensely relieved. Sometimes they go, oh, that's a load of bullshit. I had one guy whose father was in the military police of the Green Berets. So he was the cop who was in charge of controlling the most highly trained soldiers and killers in the United States military. He was one tough SOB, and he just bulldozed his son. And when I talked to his son about this idea of self, he says, That useless old hippie, he couldn't do anything. He wasn't there. He didn't help me. Don't tell me anything about that useless old hippie. I don't want to hear that garbage. And it took, oh gosh, I think it was a year before that guy actually could turn inside and look and sense that there was something good and radiant at his core.
Yeah. So when are these parts influenced by life events? I mean, are they kind of set from an early age, or what? As we go through becoming a father, getting married, however,
Yep,
things that
they are
change.
definitely influenced by life events. However, many of them, the ones IFS calls exiles, they took in and held the worst life experiences, like the shame of being raped, or the terror of waiting for when the next beating was going to come. And because the system as a whole could not tolerate these terrible experiences, one part sort of took that in and carried it for the whole system, and then sort of encapsulated all those huge emotions, and often a whole belief system with it, like I'm bad, I deserve this. And then they got encapsulated like a cyst or something deep inside the person. Those parts can be relatively immune to later life experiences until the person's able to go back, witness their suffering, and get them free from where they've been trapped. They're almost literally trapped in some other time and place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess the other part of that I'm thinking of is the cultural or legacy burdens like that have impacted men over a lifespan or beyond, which I think is perhaps controversial as well. But and I think the natural sciences are catching up to us around epigenetics and how things are passed on. But I'm curious how you understand that aspect of the model and what you would have to say about that, how that influences men.
It definitely does. And there is hard science behind this. And I joke around. I say, for modern academics, it doesn't seem to matter very much if you can do it with a person. But if you can do it with a rat, it's real. It's the rat standard of reality. And there are experiments with rats that show this happens. You want me? I'd like to sort of go into the DS wrestler experiment because I think it's so wonderful.
Sure.
Is that okay? Or is
Yeah, please.
uh, DS was a psychologist at Emory University in Atlanta. Wrestler with an R, not a W, if you're going to fact check me, is an MD at Harvard. And Diaz realized that in the poor Hispanic neighborhoods he grew up in, mental illness and addiction ran in families. And he wondered, could there be something more than just behavioral transmission? Could there be some kind of, legacy burden? So he designed what I think is a brilliant experiment. He exposed male rats to a chemical that's sort of pleasant. It's like cherries or almond blossoms or, something innocuous or pleasant. And he paired that with an electric shock until they had a conditioned startle response to this smell, a reliable startle response when they smelled this chemical. He took the semen from the male rats and impregnated female rats who had never smelled that chemical and who had never been exposed to the behaviors of the male rat. When the pups of that female rat were old enough, they exhibited the startle response to that smell. And this is reliably replicated. Everything I was trained in high school, college, and grad school said that's absolutely impossible and only a maniac would think something like that could happen. But it happens. So why this is so important, I think, something could have happened a generation or so ago, or even more, in your family that you don't know about at all. And it can have such a powerful impact on your nervous system that it controls your emotional and physiological responses to certain stimuli. That's the idea of a legacy burden. And it happens in people a lot. And there's all sorts of other science around this. The best science is from the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Rachel Yehuda, I think she's at NYU. Anyway, she's somewhere in New York City, an MD. Over 500 peer-reviewed studies showing the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have different cortisol chemistry and a whole bunch of other things that are different. So our ancestors, even ones we have no cognitive knowledge of, can have a profound effect on who we are and how we react and behave.
And I wonder if you could say anything about it. I mean, we're situated in the U.S., but how might that be handled, or how is that handled or seen outside of the U.S., these ideas of generational healing or generational trauma?
I really go out of my way to work with people from other cultures. My wife is Korean, native Korean, and lots of stuff there. I've taught in China. I am teaching currently in Japan. I've taught in Pakistan. I have this amazing Vietnamese client, and I'm working there. Worked in North Africa, Australia, Mexico, bunch of other. I even had a client in New Caledonia, and I had to get an atlas. I had no idea where New Caledonia was. So I've worked hard to try and get this wider view, because I was worried about, am I just got blinders on from the West? And there's in general, almost everywhere else is much more aware of the impact our ancestors have on us. And they have more traditional ways of dealing with it, ancestor rituals and stuff like that.
Okay. So maybe even more immediately, is it possible for a sibling to pass on a trait sort of in the current generation from one person to the other? And is that, kind of confused about that one, but I've seen that where there's an influence that of not a generational influence, but an influence that happened more immediately.
Yes, definitely. I'm going to go a little bit off topic because that's what I do, Pete. I never colored inside the lines in my life, and I'm not going to start now. Robert Bly, who was, one of the great founders of the first men's movement, or the first American men's movement, he wrote a whole book called The Sibling Society. And he said, what's basically happened, we don't have good images of a powerful male, a good father. We're really, really lacking that. And so what's happened instead is men have turned to their siblings. So instead of getting what one might hope might be a little more mature wisdom out of a father, they turn to their siblings, and their worldviews are basically adolescent all the way around. There's no male who is seen as reliable, strong, powerful, with all those good qualities. Yeah, them providing a value system. Yeah. It's really poisonous.
So if we're interested in how men heal, it probably helps to start to first understand what they're healing from. And you've alluded to that. And certainly you can build off of that or reference it again. But what have you noticed about the way boys and men are wounded or experience trauma?
Well, there's everything I said. I don't need to repeat it. I think shame. We got to talk about shame. And who wants to talk about shame? It's such a miserable subject. It's super, super, super important for everybody. And I think it's especially important for men. We get shamed. We get shamed about our tenderness. We get shamed about our strength. We get shamed for being smart. We get shamed for being stupid. It's like we're swimming in this toxic, corrosive ocean of shame. I've come to believe that shame is the most difficult emotion to contain and hold. And it's just poured all over men ceaselessly. And it's become sort of the coin of the realm of our culture. If you look at like the political debates, if you can call them that, the political nastiness, that's what each side is doing to the other. It's throwing buckets of shame at each other. It's all about shame, contempt, sneering, all that stuff. Now, not only is this really, really painful and really destructive, because people, when they feel shame, they feel they have to hide who they really are. They can't be real. They can't be strong. That they can't be tender. Everything. It's even worse than that. If that's not bad enough, it gets worse. And here's why I think it's worse. There was a guy named Dr. Jim Gilligan, who's a psychiatrist, who was the federally appointed overseer of all psychiatric care in the Massachusetts state prison system, which the feds took over because it was such a mess. And he worked with the worst of the worst for 20, 30 years. And he wrote this little book, I think it was called Violence, Our National Epidemic. But he said all the violence he'd ever seen did not come out of anger, it came out of shame. That to me was a revolutionary idea. I thought it was stupid, frankly, the first time I heard it. But I mean, this was a man worth listening to. He knew these people. And he said one thing, for example, he said one of the guys who'd been a serial murderer on death row, he said Jim was interviewing him, and the guy said to him, "You know, Doc, when I had a gun in a man's face, he respected me." That still sends chills down my spine. Respect is the opposite of shame. And it is so important to some people, they will kill to feel respected. Another thing that might open up this deep, profound connection between violence and shame, a lot of the gangsters and the teenager fighters on the street, they talk about dissing. Don't you diss me, disrespect. And when people feel dissed, they have to fight. They have to fight. It's right there. So I think this is profoundly, profoundly true and very uncomfortable to accept. And shame is often used by parents and definitely schools and churches and to control children, even though it damages them profoundly. And the reason why people keep using it is it works, because it's so corrosive. So in talking about men's healing, we have to talk about shame.
Are there wounds that tend to get overlooked in men?
Well, childhood sexual abuse. All these studies, there's a guy at the University of New Hampshire, or he's probably dead, because I'm so old, most of the people I respect are dead. David Finkelhor, and he was the world's expert on the statistics of childhood sexual abuse. And the numbers were about 1 in 6 men is sexually abused as a child, 1 in 3 women. That's what the surveys showed. I think the numbers are much, much closer. I just think we men lie about it a lot more.
Yeah, the secret of the shaming that goes on. Yeah.
Yep, the shaming makes secrets, and then the secrets make those sub-personalities get all encapsulated and buried deep inside where they can't heal, and then those buried deep in encapsulated emotions actually run the system and control the whole system.
Are there groups of men that are more vulnerable to develop trauma?
I don't think there are groups who are not vulnerable. Frankly, I mean, a loving, supportive family, that would go a long, long ways. There's the ACEs study, which that also came out, of adversive childhood experiences scale. It's 10 simple questions, and you can get a score 0 to 10. 10 is you got a lot of nasty stuff happening to you when you're a kid. 0 is pretty smooth. None of the big baddies happen to you. The guy who invented this, Folletti, worked for Kaiser, and so he had access to like 30,000 medical files. And he found that people who scored high on the ACEs thing, in other words, had really rough childhoods, they had more heart disease, they had more addiction, they had more obesity, they had more diabetes. I mean, on and on and on and on, not just psychological distress. So people with rough childhoods are going to have a harder time. But I don't know how we, if the people who are fairly immune to this have good childhoods. But I mean, that's kind of hard. we can't legislate that backwards. And I think attempts to legislate it usually make it worse.
Yeah. So